Kuri, and welcome to this segment of Kuri Conversations. And before we do anything else, we're going to do something that's very Canadian, aside from the audience going silent and aside from us starting on time. We're going to acknowledge the history, spirituality, culture, and stewardship of the land of the indigenous people of this region, most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the land that we stand on today. I bet you will unlikely to hear this being said down south. Also today is the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. That's right. For tonight, we're going to modify that a little bit and say it's International Day for the Elimination of All Discrimination. Today is also something else. Any Persians in the crowd? Any Ismailis? Baha'is? What's today? Nowruz. That's right. What's that? I can't hear you. Oh, I see. See, I did not know that, but it's the beginning of spring in many parts of the world, and it's Mother's Day, and Coren was yesterday. Was it yesterday? It's today. Okay. All right. And yet you're here. I mean, we've got all these things happening today, and you chose to be here, so thanks for that. It's Mother's Day in the Middle East, as many people know, and to mothers in the audience, Happy Mother's Day. And to those who are out there celebrating Nowruz and couldn't be with us, we apologize for the scheduling oversight. So today is the sixth of these Kuri conversations that we periodically have, and they're really, focused. We have an agenda. And that agenda is the promotion of human rights and inclusion. So we did not approach this evening's topic from the perspective of is it yes or no. No, we're saying yes, sexual orientation and religious belief can be reconciled. And we're here to talk about how and learn from those who have been able to do it. And so these are not debates. These are not pitting one side against the other. This is about improving our understanding of complex issues that affect many of us on a daily basis. We've dealt with the niqab in Canada. We've dealt with Palestinian and Jewish narratives. We've dealt with stereotypes of Arab men. We like the light topics that you can, have easy conversations about. Now, as any organization, we have a mailing list, and every time we send a mail out, of course, you get some people saying, unsubscribing. They figure there's too much mail coming into their inbox. They figure, I can follow this information on social media. I don't need to see it here. So every time I send a mail out announcing an event, I get some unsubscribers. This time, for this particular panel, the unsubscriber numbers were 5 times, 6 times the usual. And I can. Some of them, of course, are for the usual reasons. I get too much mail. I don't need more. But some of them, I'm sure, had to do with the subject matter of what we're here to do today, which makes it the more important than we're actually having this conversation. Many people do not appreciate that if an LGBTQ person is not accepted by her parents or by her faith, how difficult that is. Most of the people I've spoken to about this kind of subject are either with or against. So you'll have someone from the LGBT community saying, I've given up on religion a long time ago, it's gone. Or you have those who have had to give up on their sexuality to remain part of their faith, and that's an impossible ask, but it's there. So that's why we wanted to talk about this today. see how we can better understand it, help those who are well-meaning to get to grips with it, and hopefully, there are many people who do not want to discriminate but are conflicted because their religion, as they see it, as they know it, have told them that it's a sin. So we'll talk about that today. Now, I want some thanks and acknowledgments. I want to thank the steering committee. When I first got the idea for this work, I approached Reverend Brent and I said, what do you think about this? And he said, absolutely, let's do it. So we put together a steering committee with him, Amy Hannon of TD Bank, author and Professor Kamal Al-Sulaili, and Helen Kennedy of EGAL. I want to thank them for working with me for the last few months, actually, that we've been preparing this and putting it together and being my advisors and providing direction. I have to acknowledge our sponsor tonight, which is TD Bank. I think we have a good contingent of people from TD Bank here tonight. Let's hear them. Without sponsors, it's really very hard to make these kinds of events feasible. So I'm really thankful to TD Bank. They came forward, Alvin Poon and Amy Hannon, and they said, we're going to support you with this. It's an important conversation, and we think it should happen. Our media part of tonight is Extra Daily, and many thanks go to our community partners who helped us promote this event and reach out to you and bring you here, and they are Ryerson University, Human Rights Watch Canada, OPS Pride Network, the Mosaic Institute, and EGAL, and the Masjid al-Tawheed, or the Unity Mosque. Thank you, partners, for helping us promote this event and standing with us today. Are there any queers in the house? All right, I thought there might be a few here. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our panelists next, and I will start with Reverend Brent Hawks. He's an LGBTQ2 activist and senior pastor emeritus of Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto, where he was at the forefront of ministry to the community for over 40 years. On January 14, 2001, he officiated at the first legal same-sex marriages in the world. He received the order, yes. He received the Order of Canada, the Order of New Brunswick, and 3 honorary degrees for his stand on social justice and human rights within the LGBTQ2 communities. He is the founder of the Rainbow Faith and Freedom Movement to confront and diminish religious-based homophobia around the world. You will also remember him as the minister who officiated over the funeral of the late Jack Layton. Michael Coren, who is, as you can see, not with us tonight, unfortunately had an emergency happen at the last minute. As I was entering this building today, I got a call from him. Now, he's not with us, but we're going to call him, and he's going to give his presentation over the phone to us, and that way we at least manage to get to learn from his experience and not lose out on it completely. So he's an author, radio personality, columnist, and speaker. He hosted a nightly television show for 17 years and is a columnist for the Toronto Star, a frequent contributor to the Globe and Mail, Now Magazine, iPolitics, The Walrus, and Maclean's. And he appears each week on Global TV and on CBC News Network. He is the best-selling author of 16 books and is published in more than a dozen languages. Michael has won numerous awards, including in 2012 the Queen's Jubilee Medal for his services to media, and in 2013 he was named North American Columnist of the Year at the Catholic Press Association Awards. His most recent book is Epiphany, a Christian's change of heart and mind over same-sex marriage. And then we've got Ahmed, the guy with a nice beard over there, and he works at Ryerson University. And I was so lucky to come across Ahmed, I tell you, and you're going to love his story and his contribution tonight. And that's thanks to Ryerson University. He is the strategic advisor and analyst to the Human Rights Service. He has over 15 years of experience in program development and delivery, education and training, administration and strategic planning in a number of sectors. He holds an undergraduate degree in equity studies, a master's degree in community development and adult education, and has recently undertaken a PhD in the Faculty of Education at York University, where his research focuses on access to post-secondary education for traditionally underrepresented communities. As a queer person of faith, Ahmed believes that social justice and equity are spiritual issues as much as they concern the material and social conditions of all of our lives. And last but not least, the lovely lady in the end is Tasnim Jessa-Pardhan, is a finance executive with TD Bank with over 15 years of experience and is currently based in Toronto. Tasnim has worked in the financial services and transportation sectors, as well as in consulting and public accounting. She is a graduate of the Schulich School of Business, where she obtained both her bachelor and master's degrees, and also holds the CPA, CA professional designations. Tasnim is a Muslim with cultural influences from South Asia, North America, and East Africa. Growing up, the LGBTQ2 community was closed off to her, but education and exposure to the community sparked Tasnim's journey of open-mindedness. Please welcome our panel tonight. And our first panelist is Reverend Brent.
After 40 years of ignoring a clock when I speak, I think it's about time that I paid attention to it, so I'm setting my timer. Raja, thank you for this evening, and thank you for all of these conversations and bridge building that you've done down through the years. Having worked with you, I'm very impressed with not only your personal openness and your commitment to human rights, but also your commitment to improving society's approach to human rights. So thank you for bringing people together and for facilitating these conversations. Thank you. So I've been asked to give some background, some context for this evening's discussion, and I want to do that from both a personal perspective and a political perspective. Most of the world's religions are struggling with the issue of sexuality and spirituality, not just homosexuality. In the 1970s, the United Church of Canada set up a commission on homosexuality, and after a few months, the commissioners came back to the head office and said, we need to change our title. We don't need just to discuss homosexuality. We need to study human sexuality, because the church has a problem with sexuality, not just with homosexuality. And so I think that we live in a very sex-negative time. And I think we underestimate the impact of a sex-negative society on individuals and on our institutions. And I believe that that sex-negative society particularly negatively impacts the LGBT community and their acceptance. And part of the challenge that we face as faith communities is the double emphasis on most of our faith communities rely on our sacred scriptures that are thousands of years old. And frankly, at a time when people didn't understand much about many, many, many different topics. And so when we rely on those ancient documents, and then when we combine it with a more literalist approach to those documents, then that creates a problem. Can you imagine for a moment if the health sector of society used a 2,000-year-old medical book and tried to enforce it legalistically? Or if the legal system used the law books from 2,000 years ago, or science used books from 2,000 years ago, and tried to apply them legalistically, the problem that we would be in. Well, that's the problem we're in most of our faith communities. And this can cause huge personal difficulties for LGBT people and for our families. If we're viewed as unrepentant sinners, then we become alienated from faith communities. And also the impact that has more broadly on society. LGBT people are deeply spiritual individuals, and many cultures in the past have recognized that unique spirituality. But historically, most of the world religions have had a problem at one time or another, and I think it's really important for us to remember that there is no faith, none of the world's major religions are better than any of the others when it comes to this issues. We've all had our bad moments and our bad times in history. And for those of us here this evening, we need to remember that it was British colonialism that brought much of the bad laws and the bad religion to many parts of the world. Now, politically, here in Canada, there have been two groups that have historically opposed LGBT human rights. The first is people who say they don't know anyone who's gay. And as that percentage of the population has gone down, our support has gone up. But the second group that has consistently remained opposed to LGBT human rights are people who are proposed for religious reasons. And that's one of the reasons why, a short commercial, why I've started the Rainbow Faith and Freedom movement, to confront religious-based homophobia, not to try to change the laws, other people can do that, but how do you change the hearts and minds of people in faith? How do you make families and faith communities safer and more accepting for LGBT people? And this opposition of religion has impacted criminalization. There are 70 countries in the world where everyone in this room would be arrested for being at this kind of an event, just for attending, gay or straight. And in 8 of those countries, those of us who are gay would be executed. It impacts discrimination in employment and housing and public services. It impacts the level of violence that is perpetrated against LGBT people. Surely, as people of faith, the minimal thing we should do is to exercise compassion, which is a central value of all of our religions, and work towards stopping the violence. And it impacts our relationships and our relationship recognition. The bottom line is that even among secular society, the sacred books have power. So many people will say, but doesn't the Bible say? When they've never read it, they don't pay much attention to it for other topics. There's good sign. Lots of LGBT people of faith are claiming their spirituality and claiming their sexuality without apology. More and more allies are coming out, like PFLAG and other organizations, young evangelicals in North America. The polls tell us they no longer care about homosexuality and abortion. They care about poverty and the environment. So there are good things that are happening in faith communities, and I hope that ultimately that faith communities will lead the way to make sure that families and their faith communities are more accepting. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to call Michael Coren now and cross our fingers that this will work. This is totally unrehearsed because we didn't have time to do it.
Hello.
Hey, Michael, it's Raja here.
Hello there.
And there are about 240 angry people here in the audience.
Thank you.
Can you hear him okay?
Yeah.
They can hear you, Michael,
okay, yeah.
So the floor is yours.
Okay, well, first of all, I have to say it's typical. The only straight guy on the panel doesn't turn up, so you have to forgive me. I've never done this before in my life, but I couldn't get out of what I was asked to do about 2 hours ago. So I've got 5 minutes to cover the whole subject, have I?
That's right.
Okay. Well, where do I start? I'm a Christian. I love God, but I only think I found a fulfilled and complete relationship, loving relationship with God, about 5 or 6 years ago, when I stopped my ridiculous opposition to equal marriage and the full embrace of LGBTQ people into the church, and when I did a 180-degree turn. I've apologized for this more. There's never too many. I was wrong. But in the past 5 years, I've done all I can to try and put that right. And let me explain what my position is. Because if I thought Christianity and God opposed equal marriage and gay people, I would have little option. I'd either have to leave the faith or present that position. But this is what I believe, and this is what I know. The issue of homosexuality is hardly mentioned in the Bible, hardly at all. Lesbianism is never referred to in the Old Testament. Jesus never refers to the issue. The handful of references are in letters written by Paul, Romans 1, for example, and I think that any intelligent reading would say that whilst Paul was a genius and has so much to tell us, what he says about the issue of sexuality has no bearing on the contemporary conversation. I believe that the story of Sodom is about lack of hospitality and has nothing to do with sexuality. I believe that the thrust of the scriptures was re-emphasized by the medieval church for specific reasons of homophobia. I do believe that the galloping theme of the Gospels is very simple. It's love. Love and love again. And I'm convinced that a loving relationship between people of the same gender, based on sacrifice and commitment, honors God. I believe the union of two people in love, whatever their sexuality, leads to dancing in heaven. I believe the church has caused, beyond calculation, harm and hurt to gay people for a very long time. And in what years I have left, I'm 60 now, I know I look much younger, but in the years I have left, one of the things I'm committed to is to trying to put this relationship and this attitude right. There is a huge shift, a generational shift in the church, particularly amongst liberal Protestants, but even in the Catholic Church, even amongst young evangelicals. And those people who are still fighting from a point of homophobia, I think the reason they're so angry in the church is they know they're losing. They're losing battle after battle. We have 4 children, my wife and I. I can tell you, they cannot even comprehend anything resembling homophobia. It's beyond their cultural and social vocabulary. A new generation is different. It's motivated by love and acceptance. And it's the role of the Christian church not to come along grudgingly, but to lead this campaign into a new world where we actually embrace and love each other rather than judge and condemn each other.
You done?
Well, I'm here. I've got another 10 minutes. If you'd like to ask me a question or throw things at me, that's fine.
Okay, you said I can give your email address and you can answer questions by email. Are you still...
Yes, I only have one email. People sometimes email me and they say, could you tell him? And I think, well, if this is here, there's nobody else here. Obviously, within reason, I will reply. I even reply to most abuse, but not all. But my email is mcoren, M-C-O-R-E-N, @simpatico.ca. And no one else sees that, and if I can be of any help in any way, I'm a very small player in all this. There are some wonderful people in the... Well, I'll say this too, and I'm not saying this just to sound sycophantic. In the past 5 years of my life, the people who have transformed my faith into what I think it should have been a long time ago have largely been gay Christians. And the finest Christians I've ever met have been gay men and women, because they've stayed in churches when they've faced discrimination and even hatred. And one more thing, I suppose a lot I want to say, but when I was opposed to equal marriage in the past, I rather naively thought that it was a biblical view, it was loving and accepting towards gay people, but no to marriage. That was wrong. I realized as soon as I changed my position just how much tangible hatred there is out there. I still get it now, but it really doesn't matter. But in the first year or so, it was quite incredible what I saw. And if I, a boring straight guy, was getting this simply for supporting equal marriage, I can only imagine what it was like for gay men and women who wanted to be part of churches over the years. But really, my faith has been completely redirected into what it should be. And I haven't become so supportive of the community in spite of my faith. I want to emphasize this. I have not become supportive in spite of my faith. I have become supportive and loving because of my faith. Because my faith must teach love, otherwise it is garbage. It is nothing.
So he gets his penance? You have penance, Michael.
Pardon me?
You have penance.
I have silence?
Penance.
So I didn't hear what you said there. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Well, thank you very much. I'll call you tomorrow.
Yeah, once again, I do apologize. I don't think ever, in 30 odd years of being a journalist, I've never cancelled this sort of thing at the last minute. But it was a contractual obligation at the last minute. I couldn't say no. And I'm not very far away from you, but I just couldn't come in. But please, any emails, I'd love to get them. I'd love to chat, meet up, because I have an awful lot to learn. And is Brent on that panel, by the way?
Pardon?
Is Brent on the panel? Well,
yes, yes.
For me, because he was a wonderful mentor to me in many ways. He's a marvelous man, and I have enormous respect and love for him.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Michael. I appreciate you coming in by phone, and better to have your voice than not have you at all. So thanks again.
Well, I've got to tell you, and this is an established fact, I am at my most attractive when you can't see me. Bless you, everyone. See you soon.
Okay, bye-bye. His first ever, and it had to be with us. But that's okay. We're open-minded and open-hearted. Ahmed, would you prefer to stay here? It's okay if you want to do it here. It's whatever you're more comfortable with.
I want to stand.
Okay.
You know. Actually, the last time I was here, I was an undergraduate student doing intro to philosophy, sitting all the way back there. I'm actually quite nervous to be up here because this isn't a subject matter I talk about quite often. Actually, rarely do I talk about this publicly. My work has been often around equity and social justice issues. As a gay, black, Muslim immigrant, I came here as a refugee with my family after the Somali Civil War. I had a lot of reasons to fight for equality and social justice. But rarely do I talk about the nature of my faith and how that influences the work that I've done or how it organizes my life, my belief system, and who I am as a human being. And I think that's sad, actually. And actually it was Raja who was one of the first people to ask me, how did you reconcile your faith and sexuality? And I started to answer, lots of people have asked me that question. And I started to answer about sort of my coming to consciousness politically, my getting involved in the queer community, getting involved in activism and all of those things, and learning about the social implications of homophobia and all the ways in which there was this structure and system that was set up to deny my existence. And he said, yeah, but how did you reconcile it? And I thought that was a beautiful and poignant question. And I realized, and I knew in my heart, and I hadn't articulated it before, was that I was quite a young man when I reconciled that. I grew up in a Muslim household, which meant I learned a few things about faith that were particular to my faith tradition. I learned that my relationship with God was one-on-one. That's very important to Muslim people. I was taught that my communication, my prayers go directly to God, and that if I ever needed or wanted anything, to ask God directly. There were no intermediaries. So that was something I was taught from quite young. I was also taught that God is the ultimate judge of who I am and not other human beings. And I was taught that quite young, and that the mosque and the imam and the ummah, the faith community, were there to sort of teach us, but our primary relationship was with God. So when I was about 11, 12, and I realized I like boys, Ooh, there was a crisis, right? There was a crisis in my life. I tried to suppress it. I tried to deny it. I tried to run away from it. And it was incredibly painful. I couldn't. It refused to go away. And I prayed, because all I had was prayer. You know, I couldn't tell my mom, I couldn't tell my siblings, I couldn't tell family, I couldn't tell anybody, and I was deeply isolated and in a lot of pain, because from what I heard from everybody at the mosque, on TV, I grew up in Canada. You know, this is not specific to the Muslim community. In the 90s, I'm dating myself a little, but it was daytime talk shows. We're talking about whether gay people were like full humans, you know, people coming out as these weird, strange people, you know, and it was really, so I was left isolated and alone, and I prayed, and this took a couple of years, you know, but by the time I was 15 years old, it hadn't gone away. Who I was didn't change, and I came with this awareness that who I am was created by God. No human being did it, including myself, and that if it came from God, it can't be wrong. And I got the kind of peace only God can give. Peace in my heart. And once I had that peace, there was a strength that came with that. A strength that allowed me to face coming out to my Muslim family, coming out to my high school, coming out to the broader community, doing activist work, talking about being Muslim, black and gay, getting death threats, being hated here in Toronto. But I always knew, regardless of what else happened, that God loved me and that I was whole and that I was the way He made me. Thank you.
The kind of peace that only God can give. Wow. Thank you for that, Ahmed. Tasnim, please.
All right. You know, everybody had a timer here. I don't have a timer, so I think I'll go beyond 5 minutes. I like to talk, and my husband says I like to talk, but I promise it will be an interesting story. At least I hope it will be for you. So for most of my life, I did not support or respect the LGBT community. And over the last couple of years, I went on a personal journey and became an ally. I grew up in a staunch Muslim household where I'd spend a lot of time at religious events. It was ingrained in me from a very young age that being gay or being a lesbian is against the religion, and if you chose that lifestyle, there will be severe punishment from God. I lived in Tanzania for a few years of my life, and I saw people being beaten on the streets for being gay. My upbringing gave me this bias that being anything but heterosexual was unacceptable. And being Muslim, I understood that, you know, there's no acceptance of the LGBT community, but this was actually really hard to reconcile with what I was learning from my religious leaders, such as the love of God, and do unto others as you want them to do unto you. And being Canadian, because I did most of my schooling here, I learned to respect one another, right? We all have to respect one another. So in order to resolve these conflicting opinions that I was learning, I decided that I was going to be biased against the LGBT community, but I wasn't going to be overt about it. So I'd keep it deep in my heart. And so that meant that I was nice to everyone and I would talk to you and that would be no problem. But the moment that I found out that you're a part of the LGBT community, I would lose all respect for you. My husband and I once had a conversation when my son was born. Well, what would you do if my son came up to us and said he was gay? And my husband said, that would be cool with me. And my response was, I would die of shame. So about 3 years ago, one of the leaders that I work with at TD challenged us to go to a diversity event that we've never gone to before. So I decided to broaden my horizons and go to an LGBT event. And when I got to that event, I was so afraid and so uncomfortable to mingle. So I stood in a corner. And someone noticed. And they came up to me and introduced themselves and started to talk to me. And we started having a really great conversation. But very quickly in the conversation, I realized that they were gay. So because I was at an LGBT event, I plucked up the courage and asked them some outrageous questions. And they were very kind enough to respond to my questions. And I started to learn. And after that, I thought, wow, they're not so bad. And so I decided to go to more events and learn more about the community. About a year later, my cousin's son came out that he was gay and that he was getting married to a man, and he is Muslim. A few months later, I saw the wedding invitation on my dining room table, and when I saw that wedding invitation, the first instinct I had was, oh my God, I cannot go. But then I had to step back and realize how awesome my nephew is, and that he invited me to an event to celebrate the love that he found, and who am I to judge him? So the wedding was being held in Vancouver, and I asked my mom if she could look after my kids so that my husband and I could go. When she found out that the wedding was my nephew's wedding, she absolutely refused to look after my kids. She told me that if she's taking care of them, that means she supports gay marriage. For the first time in my life, I had a small taste of the bias that many people in the LGBT community face, and I was really angry. So I explained to her that she's not supporting gay marriage, but she's supporting me as her daughter. And she just flew off the handle. She told me how sinful this marriage was, and she forbade me to go. And my mother has never forbidden me to do anything in my life. And just a side note here, I'm South Asian, and so when your parents forbid you, they lay down the law and you're not allowed to disobey. Their word is higher than God's word. So in that moment, I was watching how the hate was unfolding in somebody that I really loved and respect. And it was directed at me, and I couldn't believe it. And I realized that it was very awful of me to have had this bias against the LGBT community for so many years. So my sister, who was observing the conversation, jumped in and said, no problem, I'll take care of your kids, you guys go and have a good time. So we went to the wedding, and it was really great, but it opened my eyes to some of the challenges that the LGBT community still faces today, and I didn't even realize this being heterosexual. So my nephew only invited a few people from the family for fear that his parents would be ostracized, and the rest of the family really wouldn't understand the whole concept of gay marriage. I found out, like my mom tried to do, that certain Muslim families forbade their kids to come, so some of his friends couldn't make the wedding. The family asked us not to take pictures or post on social media because they wanted to control the messaging for fear of the religious outcry from my religious community. So about a week or so after the wedding, a picture of my nephew and his husband was mistakenly posted on Instagram, and the picture went viral. It went all over my religious community, from East Africa to the UK to India to the United States and Canada. There was an outcry from the religious community. But the sad thing is that this outcry was not civil. There were phone calls, emails, WhatsApp messages, texts going around saying that my nephew should go kill himself. Why doesn't he go to Iran to have a sex change? Condemning his parents, banning them from coming to the mosque, and he even got death threats. People were calling my family and asking what was going on and really getting angry at them. My mom was actually scared to go to the mosque in fear of what people would say to her. It was so hateful and so spiteful, and I just couldn't believe it. But this was a pivotal moment for my family. And it was at that moment that any lingering bias I had against the LGBT community was gone. The hate went on for about a week, and then my religious leader, who is our version of the Catholic Pope, came out to our entire community worldwide with a message. And he said that he saw the emails and the WhatsApp messages, and that they were spiteful, and that they were backbiting, and that this is not how Muslims should behave, and it must stop. He further went on to say that my nephew, if he comes to mosque, is welcome, and that we should not ask him to leave. As soon as my religious leader sent this message, all the hating over social media stopped. But my religious leader's message reinforced that I was doing the right thing by challenging the status quo and forming my own opinion, that ultimately, who are we to judge others? This experience also showed me that I can be a practicing Muslim because I do love my religion, but I can also be an ally. After this experience, my husband and I sat down and said, well, what would we do if my son, or now I had a daughter at this point, would come to us and say that they were gay, lesbian, queer, transgender? And my response is now that I would tell them, I love you, and I'm proud of you, and what can I do to help? So just to sum up a few thoughts, I really think that it's important to go to events, to learn. It's important to ask questions so that you can broaden your horizon. But most importantly, when people are going through a journey, it's important to be open and challenge yourself and form your own opinions and not listen to the opinions of others like I did. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. We're going to have just a little conversation here between us, and then we will have the conversation with you. So, Brent, a religion can be love, it can be hate. Who chooses, and how do they choose?
Well, I think all the world, as I said, all the world of religion has as a central value the value of compassion. And in the Christian tradition, there are scriptures that clearly say, that we will be recognized as followers of Jesus by the way that we love one another. And there have been different periods in Christianity when that's actually been practiced. The unfortunate thing, I think, is that religion is a powerful, powerful emotion that can be used for good and can be misused, not only by people of faith, but also by politicians and others who want to exploit that. And there are some politicians and presidents of certain countries south, who are obviously not religious people, but will use that. And so I think, as I said, many institutions have been used in ways that have been very harmful to the LGBT community, not just religion. However, I think religion should be held to a higher standard. And I think we should be challenged to live our values of love and acceptance. And sometimes we do that, and sometimes we fail. But there have been many, many people of faith that have led human rights movements that have paid the price for bucking the trend, for not going along with what was being taught.
So some churches have taken that direction, others have not.
It tends to be the churches that take that direction are the ones who have a more literalist or fundamentalist approach to Scripture. And so they would take obscure scriptures that say, for instance, in the Hebrew Christian traditions, scriptures that say, women are to keep silent in church. And so they're more likely not to allow female pastors or female priests. There are scriptures that say, slave, obey your master. So they would be religions that would tend to have supported slavery for much of its history. I mean, the major support for slavery in many parts of the world was the Christian church, because they would take those obscure scriptures and ignore other ones.
So pick and choose.
Yeah. And so that, to me, that's the challenge. And as I said, the challenge is having documents that guide our faith that are 2,000 years old, and at the same time treating them literalistically, saying that, we have to follow those rules. Whereas I think, if we look at our sacred scriptures as a wonderful history of the early people of faith, how they wrestled with the same questions we wrestle with. Sometimes they got it wrong, sometimes they got it right, and we can learn a lot from their struggle, but we shouldn't be using it as a rule book to judge exactly how we are to behave today. It can be a guidance, but it shouldn't be a rule book.
Now, unfortunately, Michael Coren is not with us now, but you've had some history with him, some give and take, and he clearly has a lot of respect for you. From your perspective, how do you see his journey and how it unfolded, and how can others learn from that?
I think one of the lessons from Michael's transformation, but also from the transformation of many of the politicians today who support LGBT human rights, at one time voted against everything. And I think it's really important to not demonize your enemies. It's really important not to push them in a corner and force them to stay in that corner, but to try to win them over and to try to respond to their hatred with love. I was on many of Michael's shows, and it was really difficult. It was like going into the lion's den, and I just wanted to go take a shower afterwards and wash it all off. It just felt awful. And so finally, I just had to say, no, I can't do it anymore. It just felt abusive and stuff. But to see the transition and to see his friends who are gay people and people of faith to stick with them and to help him along that journey. He is one of the biggest allies that we have now, because he is an example of someone who can go from one extreme to now being a super ally. So, I joke about, we joke about penance, but I'm so thankful for Michael Coren, and I'm almost thankful for where he came from. That he because he came from such an awful place, then he has such a strong voice today. And if he'd been a wishy-washy kind of moderate Christian, it wouldn't be making the point that it is today. It wouldn't have the power it is. But because he came from that place, he has a strong voice, and he has paid the price. He's a journalist, and so he had lots of contracts with lots of magazines and institutions, and many of them cut him right off. And stuff. And so he's also paid the price. As have many of our families and friends, and who have supported us. And when you break ground for human rights, you pay a price, and you have to be prepared to pay that price so that people will come after us. I had to wear a bulletproof vest when I did those first weddings in 2001 in Toronto, not that long ago. Right? And I was assaulted that morning in church, and I couldn't leave my home for 2 weeks without a bodyguard. And yet today, not that long afterward, marriages are happening all over this country and more countries in the world without protest. Things can change so quickly.
Well, I hope his book is doing well. Epiphany. Support Michael. Ahmed, you made the distinction between the inside journey and the outside journey. And that how coming to terms with the inside journey and finding that peace allowed you to deal with the outside journey. I thought that was just an amazing description of the experience that you went through, and something perhaps that can help other people. And I know the main reason you agreed to be with us here today and share such intimate inside feelings is to benefit other people potentially. So, over to you.
I was waiting for a question. You're like, go on.
How did it happen? How hard was it? You managed to do it at an early age, relatively speaking. Tell us. Share your insight.
So I actually don't believe I did it. I am a person of faith, and I think it was a grace from God, a gift. I think that for me, I had two things going on. One was I had some spiritual and religious training. I have a friend who called it a religious imagination. Now, the ability to imagine that which is beyond like what you can see and touch, you know? And I think it really comes as much from our spirit as it does from other people. So I had a bit of that as a child, and I was always the type of child who liked to pray and something, you know, like sensitive, let's call it. I was a sensitive kid. And the other thing was because, so this is like the early 90s, it was quite homophobic in Canada, and it was like, and in the Muslim community, and like in my own family, I heard really negative things about queer people, so there was nowhere safe for me as a child to go and speak to anybody. So I did the one thing that I was taught, which is to turn to God with things that are so big, because for an 11-year-old child, the idea of being rejected by every single person they know, by being rejected by God, because that's what I was taught, that I'd be rejected by God, my family, my parents, you know, that I was the worst thing that anybody could think of, was overwhelming, you know, and I couldn't talk about it with anybody, so I prayed and I turned it over to God, and it didn't happen right away, you know, because when I turned it over to God, I was like, please just take it, like I don't want this, like, you know, I had like I didn't even have buyer's remorse because I didn't get it, like I didn't, you know, like it was like I just felt cursed and plagued, you know, to be this wretched thing that was so hated. And I prayed and I prayed and I said, God, I don't want to be this wretched thing. You know, I don't want to be this wretched thing that's so hated. And I think the answer I got back from God is that you are not that wretched thing that is so hated. You know? And that is something that goes beyond like my child mind's ability to conjure. You know, and I think that is where my faith comes from. You know, that I didn't have the ability to recognize I was not that wretched thing because everything in my environment told me I was. And it's something beyond my environment that told me I was a beloved child of God, whole and complete. And that's where the peace came from. So I can't tell other people how to do it. Because I didn't do it for myself. I actually believed I was that terrible thing for a while, you know? And then it was the grace of God that like freed me from that.
Well, you know, when you said that you're here today because of your faith and not in spite of your faith, I think that says a lot. That's very meaningful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tasnim, you'd said that, you know, if a gay person is sinful, then you're not the person to judge. Let God sort of judge them. How did you get there? And I mean, you can apply that to other sins, and it will not sound, you know, right. Like if someone is a thief or a murderer. Am I making things more very complicated for you?
No, you're not. Like, so I think and I can't speak I'm only speaking for myself, right? I'm not speaking for my community, but really what it boiled down to for me was respect, right? Like when you think about people and you know, people judge me for being Muslim. People judge me for being a woman. People judge me for being a visible minority. You know, who am I to judge others, right? And so, you know, that was really, truly the reconciliation to be able to become an ally. And, you know, when I hear people in the community, to your point about sin, and when I hear people in the community talking about this, and when I go to mosque, and I have to tell you that it's not very positive conversations about the LGBT community. But again, who are we to judge? Because God is our ultimate judge, right? Who's to say who's going to heaven and hell? Like, we shouldn't talk about being part of the LGBT community as a sin. It's a choice, I think. And so, again, who are we to judge? God is the judge. And that's sort of what got me through a lot of that. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, many say it's a choice. You're not, it's not how you were born, and that's why you deserve to be punished. Or, I mean, that goes to the heart of many of the historical.
Yeah, I think for a long time, the response in the LGBT community is that it's not a choice. That we were born that way, it's no choice, etc. I think that while there may be some of us who felt that we were born that way. I mean, as far back as I can remember, I've known that I was gay. It was just, when I was dreaming about Tarzan, I was really dreaming about Tarzan. There weren't no Jane in the pictures at all. Call me Jane if you want, but but as far back as I can remember, but I didn't have words for it. I didn't, I remember one of the earlier incidents I must have been very young, because I was watching some guys play basketball, and they were joking about homosexuals. And afterwards, one of the guys was practicing by himself, and I said to him, "What's a homosexual?" And he said, "Go look it up in the dictionary and tell me how to spell it." And I remember going home in the dictionary, and then a few days later, he was practicing again by himself, and he said, "So did you look it up?" And I said, "Yeah, it's something about two men loving each other or two women loving each other." And I said, "I think that's me." And he picked me up, and he set me on a fence post, and he said, "That's evil and that's dirty. Don't you ever tell anyone." So I had to learn what other people thought about me. So back to the question, though, about whether it's learned or a choice, I think it's dangerous for us to say that it's that we're born this way. I think many of us affirm that, and that's okay. But religion is a choice, right? And we shouldn't be putting people down because they make a choice. What's wrong with the choice of choosing to be gay? If that was your choice, for most of it, I don't think it is. But what would be wrong with that? So whether it's nature or nurture, born that way, or choice, we can discuss it. We can sometimes politically it's more advantageous to say it's not a choice, and so therefore. But I've always been a little bit nervous because it's been a challenging life, but I would choose none other. I thank God that I'm gay. I think it might have been really boring otherwise.
I think the choice question is a bit of a red herring. I think that it makes it about the origin, where it comes from. Mm-hmm. But I don't think people really care where it came from. I think what people care about is the choice to be open and honest. People don't want you to come out, and people don't want you to disrupt their belief system, and people don't want you to claim who you are. That has been my experience. When I was 15 years old, my aunt sat me down because I was starting to swish already. So she said, she put me, she asked me to come, she asked me to go to my bedroom with her, and she sat me down on my bed, and she said, "Ahmed, you grew up here, and you don't know our culture, but there's some things that I think you should know." And I hadn't come out to her or anything. I was still struggling in my own heart, but everybody could see it, And she said, "Go to school, get an education, get married, have children, and whatever you do on the side, that's your business. But as long as you're a respectable man, nobody can say anything about you. It's about respectability. That's what people care about. Like commitment to their traditions, like the Reverend here is talking about, like commitment to their traditions and these books and all these things, which I have some commitments to as well. But the nature and nurture, were you born this way? That's not what gets people upset, I think, fundamentally. It's that when you're out, it makes them have to face certain things they'd rather not face. Whether it's a straight person who has to face, how am I going to deal with what I've been taught in my religious community? How am I going to support this person also? That's what I think is that's a lot of the fighting's about.
So if someone comes to you and says, "Look, you're a person, I'm going to respect you. I'm not going to, I'm going to deal with you like any other person. But I know you're going to go burn in hell, but that's not my business.
Actually, when I literally have been told that, my sort of standard response, so like, because I have to care enough about you to actually answer that, because I'm not going to bother, like, often if, like, whatever.
But this is what that person actually believes, that
No, and
that religion...
friends and family say something along those lines. And I said, actually, you know what? In my religion, it's only God knows. And for you to make claims about who gets to go to heaven and hell is you're making claims about God. You're not God. And that's the actual sin. Between the two of us, the only one who committed a sin right now is you for speaking for God.
What do you think, Tasnim?
No, I'm definitely in agreement.
How are things with your mother, by the way?
Surprisingly, she's become a lot more open to the LGBT community. We were, over Thanksgiving, we were actually able to openly talk about LGBT, and she didn't freak out and she didn't leave the table. So positive steps, small baby steps, but that's a good thing, right? No, I totally agree, and I think it's important for people to have the mindset that nobody's opinion matters but your own, really, about yourself. So, if somebody, even came up to me, like, I mean, even if we put LGBT aside, people could come up to me being Muslim saying, oh, I'm of a different religion, and being a Muslim is, against my religion, and you're going to go to hell because you're Muslim. What do I care? I have to be okay with myself and be able to sleep at night, right?
You have something to say.
That's true. In as far as, and sister, please.
Yes.
Sister, please. In as far as, like, for me in my personal life, it's in as far as, like, the personal domain, that is true. But in the social, in the political, like, then it does matter, right? If there's no legal protection for me, and I, like, looking for an apartment with my, like, partner, and having, like, we come in and we're looking at a one-bedroom and they're like, wow, and it's like, we need a one-bedroom apartment. Like, there needs to be legal protections, there needs to be social protections for queer and trans people. Yeah. So I think, like, we're at this point now where it's like, well, we can tolerate people. And I think I'm much more comfortable usually talking about the political aspect of it, right? But fundamentally, on a day-to-day basis, like, I can ignore some of the, like, ignorance, but at the same time, like, I can't ignore the fact that there are material and social inequalities for queer and trans people. Like, we know the lives of trans, racialized women in this city who live at the very margins of the society, and that is not about individual people's opinions. It's about the society and the way it's structured to devalue their lives. And that, if we are people of faith, how can we abide by that? That if the mercy of God is available to all of us, how come we can watch people be shoved into the very edges of society and walk by?
Well, if you're a person of faith, you can't, right? Like, you just can't, right? And even if you're not a person of faith, I think if you're, you just care about humanity, you can't, right?
Yeah.
So, but I, and I hear what you're saying, but also, like, recognize me being a woman and being a visible minority and being a Muslim, I faced a lot of hardship too. So I understand the struggles.
Yeah.
I totally do.
Yeah.
But I think, to my point earlier, like, I've been discriminated against since I was a little girl, right? Like, living here, I've had people throw balls at me. Like, I've seen it, right? And so, being a woman, being in East Africa, how they treat women are, put in the back and in the back burner, and it's a man's world. I've seen it, and I've experienced some of that. But I think what's important is you have to be strong, and you can't care about others' people's opinions. You have to work through that and push through that. And I think that was my point before, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to open it up now for a broader conversation. We have ushers with mics, but before we do that, I have an important announcement to make. The next conversation, April 24th, take out your phones and put that down. April 24th, we are going to have a conversation called When a Man Married Jess. Iman is a Muslim Palestinian woman who is married to Jess, who is a Jewish woman. They are both comedians. So they are going to come to this room and they're going to perform a sketch, a comedy, stand-up comedy routine for about 45 minutes. And then we're going to have a conversation with them. Now, think about this. 2 comedians, one Muslim Palestinian, one Jewish, married to each other, both women. Lots of material to work with there. So put the date down, April 24th. We're going to be here and you're going to be here. Now, the ushers are around. Raise your hand, the mic will come to you. And please just remember, we do have respectful conversations here, and only respectful conversations. And when we disagree respectfully. So just keep that in mind, please. All right, we've got a hand there. The man in the blue shirt, if we can get the mic him, and then the lady here. All right, go ahead, sir. Okay, please state your name and then.
My name is Noah Goodbaum. I'm from the Baha'i community. And thank you all very much for being part of this, for sharing your stories. It means a great deal to us. The Baha'i community is not affirming, but there's a very rich spiritual tradition of scriptures about love that have been useful to me walking the path as an LGBTQ affirming Baha'i ally. I wanted to ask, I would imagine that Reverend Hawks, you would broadly identify as a Christian. Mr. Ahmed, you're Sunni, and if I'm understanding things correctly, I don't know your surname, I don't want to get it wrong, but Tasnim, you're an Ismaili, and the religious leader to whom you refer was the Aga Khan?
No.
Oh, forgive me, who was it, if you don't mind?
I am Ithna Ashari.
Oh, you're Ithna Ashari?
Yeah, so it was Aga Shastani.
Oh, wonderful. And I wanted to ask if there are scriptures to which you turn as you work through issues around your sexuality and your faith. Are there bits of Sunnah material? Are there Bible verses? Are there material from your traditions that you love and that you hold fast to as you work through these issues?
Yes, and there have been a number of books written in terms of not just trying to explain away the scriptures that condemn, but also trying to lift up the positive scriptures. And I mean, I was at first, when I was coming out and trying to reconcile my being raised a strict fundamentalist Baptist. And by the way, Sunday I'm preaching at First Baptist Church in Guelph. And they're the third Baptist congregation that I know of that's looking at becoming affirming and breaking away from the Baptist Federation in order to becoming an affirming congregation. One in Halifax, one in Burlington, and now First Baptist Church in Guelph. So good things are happening. But when I was first struggling with being gay and Christian, I didn't want to just take the Bible and take a pair of scissors and cut out some scriptures and just throw them out and then say, now the Bible's okay, right? And so I wanted to reconcile it, and it was more important for me then than it is now. I'm okay with the Bible having some mistakes. I'm okay with recognizing that some other people struggled with the questions that we struggle with, and they got it wrong. I'm not expecting perfection, right? Because if I expect perfection, then it's some pretty miserable perfection that's there, right? But I've also been pleasantly surprised about the number of scriptures that are really LGBT affirming. I mean, the story of Jonathan and David, if you read that story, You know, that's the story of a gay love story. When Jonathan was killed and David said, your love for me was more than the love for a man for a woman. And in the King James Version, when it says that, and when Jonathan's father said, you know, you're an embarrassment to your mother, you put her to shame with your relationship with David, I ban you from seeing each other. And then eventually, when Jonathan snuck out of the house, it said that he snuck out of the house and they ran and they met with each other and they kissed each other until David exceeded, which meant he had an orgasm. Right? That's in Scripture. You know, the story of Ruth and Naomi, we don't know if that was ever consummated as a sexual relationship, but it was a very loving relationship. And today, even in the Roman Catholic Church, one of the scriptures that's used in heterosexual marriages to express love is the words that one woman said to another woman in Scripture. Your God will be my God. Where you go, I will go, etc. So, you know, there's some wonderful affirming stories in Scripture, and there's some wonderful principles about judge not, lest ye be judged. You know, love one another, love God, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. You know, so there's some wonderful, uplifting scriptures and some amazing books that have been written, and I would assume that that's true of all of our traditions. That there's great scholarship being done now, both by LGBT people, but by allies, reclaiming our scriptures, our sacred scriptures. And helping us to navigate where they're problematic.
I'm a little different. I guess maybe because I had my experience when I was quite young. Things that have been helpful in terms of understanding the Quran. As a Muslim person, we understand it's like the perfect word of God. That is the miracle of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. That so I don't need it to fit, like, I don't need to change it around, like the Reverend was saying, I don't need to cut it apart. That understanding it as metaphorical, it is some of the most beautiful prose in any language. Even in translation, it's quite gorgeous. So understanding, like, the intention was as teaching stories that were, in essence, that were never designed to be taken literally, has been really helpful for me. I think when people try to use like scripture to justify like things that are innately, like for me, that are innate in who I am, it's like when people try to use science to justify religion. It's like the earth, if it's this close to the sun, have you ever heard that argument? There's this argument that goes that like, there's like the ring that the earth goes around the sun, and if it goes too far, the Goldilocks zone, if it goes too far, there would be no life on Earth, and if it was too close, there'd be no life. It would either be too hot or too cold. And people of faith are like, that's evidence that there is God. I'm like, that's evidence there's physics. Like, calm down, you know. But like, I get all these like, you know, like I have friends and family who like send me stuff about like scientific proofs of God. I'm like, I don't need a guy in a lab coat to prove God to me, you know. And I think like I don't need a theologian. As much as it like calms me down, it allows me to have conversation and arguments to retort and to respond to people who are misinformed sometimes or hateful. But in my heart, like I don't need that. Just like I don't need a scientific explanation. You know, sometimes it's like nice, but I'm good.
So for me, the Quran is too hard. Because, you know, the way that we were taught is when I'm reading the translation, like said, you can't take it very literally. You need to have a lot of knowledge, a lot of back-end stories to be able to truly understand what that means. It is extremely complex. Different interpretations every time you read the same thing. So for me, I turn to the stories of the Prophet, and because I'm Shia, the Imams, and really think about the morality and how they treated people. Right? Because that's really the number one thing. It's how do you treat people? How do you have that akhlaq, right? And that's, to me, that's the most important thing.
Thank you for that. We have the lady here, and then the man in the back. And please, you know, we're trained to only ask questions, and this is called Q&A, but this is a conversation, so if there's something you want to say, that you want to share with us, and feel free to do so. It's because, again, this is a give and take. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this wonderful evening. It's been such a pleasure. The humor is great. The humor is fantastic. I attend Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto, where Brent for 40 years was our pastor. And one thing he said many times is there are many paths to God and many paths that we can choose. And also, too, that it depends on what Bible you're reading. Some people have their own Bible they made up. So that's one avenue. And so, did I say my name? I think I did, right? Yeah, Marilyn Byers. So I want to mention that at our church also is the first school, that I think it's in the world, called the Triangle School, where children, teenagers, are going to this high school, and they've been, made fun of in their own school before, and now they're at ease at this school. So it's an amazing place, the Triangle School. I belong to PFLAG, and I don't know if everybody here knows what PFLAG is, Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, and they do a lot of good. So you should look that up on the web, and it's a place to go if you still have questions, or if you need help for your mom and dad. That's another thing. The Catholic Church has closed their doors on going in and speaking. At least they did for me, and I did that for 13 years in one of the schools. The principal is here right now. They didn't want, they wanted their own people to speak. They wanted to control it, which is very sad, because the students needed to get the proper education. So I was a teacher with the Catholic School Board in Resource in Religion and Family Life, which gave me that introduction to go in. I had a handout called "You Can Be Catholic and Gay Too." And while I was at the door talking to the vice principal, because I asked him to come and stay in the room, because one of the other teachers was bothering what I was doing and questioning all the time. And I had shown the students this article saying, "You can be Catholic and gay too." And while I was talking to this principal at the door, this particular teacher's going through all my material, looking for, "You can be Catholic and gay, you can't be Catholic and gay too," in his mind. But the article said, "You can be Catholic and gay." So I enjoyed every one of you. You were amazing. You left me with a lot to take home and think about. And, I can use it in my talks when I have talks to give to people, because you are a blessed people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The Catholic Church is not budging, right? I mean, it's...
No, I think I almost gave Cardinal Carter a heart attack years ago, because the media were interviewing me. There was some battle about gay rights or something, and way back in the early days, before some people were born. And they said, Reverend Hawks, don't you feel isolated, that you're the only religious leader speaking out in support of these issues? And I said, no. There's lots of people, lots of United Church clergy in support, and lots of liberal rabbis are in support. And I said, and the Roman Catholic Church is in support. And they said, what? And I said, yes, the Roman Catholic Church. The public opinion polls have told us in North America, the segment of society that's most likely to be supportive of LGBT human rights are Roman Catholics. The first province in Quebec to protect LGBT people and human rights was Quebec. The first state in the United States to give equal marriage was Massachusetts, both the most Catholic segments of their countries. And in Europe, the countries that supported equal marriage first were all Catholic countries. Yeah. And so, but I said, people keep saying that the church is the people. Yeah. And if Catholic people are supportive of LGBT human rights, then the church is, not the hierarchy, but the church. So the reporter went to Cardinal Carter and said, Reverend Hawks is saying the Catholic Church is supportive of gay rights. I said, he said, but isn't the church the people? Of course the church is the people. Well, if the public opinion polls tell us the Catholics are supportive,
well,
the church is supportive.
That's right. The people are often ahead of their institutions, and on this and many other things.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, we had, I think, the gentleman in the back with the mic, and then, okay, all right. Keep your hands up, I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Anas, and I came from Syria. I want to thank everyone.
They don't have gays in Syria.
No, it's illegal to be gay in Syria, but we do have gays in Syria. The first thing I want to say is thanks everyone for everything that you shared with us, but I still feel this is a little bit personal experience from each one what they're saying. I would like to know what is the Quran say exactly about being gay or have sex with another guy or another girl. Because actually I know, but relation with God and try to find solution for how we can be gays and we can be right Muslim. Because what I believe or what I know it is to be, if I say I want to go to heaven, so I should do whatever Quran exactly say. And what is the judgment in Quran for being gay? The same thing for the Catholic or for Christian. Also, if you want to go to heaven, if we believe or not, whatever, but if we want to go to heaven, that we should do exactly what they said or the meaning of. So, are we going to talk here about something specifically, go back exactly to the Quran or to the book to know what is the thing with them?
Well, I think we heard our panelists talk about you can find everything in each book and choose to read it and interpret it, the way you want. And there's but I mean, specifically, what does the Quran say? I mean, is it or does it say
I'm
one
not
thing?
a theologian. I just have maybe one question to you. What does all but one surah in the Quran begin with? What is the opening line for every?
I'm Catholic.
Oh, serious? Okay. There's one.
That's called stereotyping,
But actually,
Yeah.
I know what is the judgment of being gay in Quran. If they catch two same-sex people having sex, I know what they're gonna do with it.
Yeah, I don't. So anyway, the point I was trying to make, which felt quite flat, is that just about every surah in the Quran begins with the God is most merciful, most gracious. So that is the beginning for every So that is the context under which we must understand these things as well. There are specific things the interpretation of the story of Lot, the Prophet Lot in the Quran. By the way, I'm not a theologian, but these are things that I've learned that have helped me along the way. There's a similar story in the Bible. The Sodom and Gomorrah is the Christian version. That story is about rape, right? I'm not with this. I'm opposed to rape as well. So I don't and that's the only story, to the best of my knowledge, in the Quran that people use as a very explicit denunciation of homosexuality. That's not a denunciation of homosexuality. That's a denunciation of sexual violence.
But I think there's a story about the homosexuality in Quran, how they. I'm not really sure, but because something about how they got it put him in the seventh floor down I don't know. Okay. It's called Lut. I believe that.
Lut, right? It's
that's mentioned in Quran also.
I think that it's easy today to go Google is your friend, and to Google documents that talk about what does the Bible, what does the Quran, etc. say, and how is that being interpreted in a progressive way or a conservative way. So there's lots of materials out there around that. I would just say that when we get into I'm not saying this, but when people get into taking a particular verse out of a sacred scripture and want to use that to condemn a whole society, they're often picking and choosing and ignoring other things, and I think that's dangerous. And so I do think it's important for us to try to understand what the sacred documents are saying, but not to use them as a rule book to hammer people in terms of their moral choices.
Okay, thank you. So the gentleman over there with the mic. This gentleman here was first, I think. Yeah, and then the guy with the T-shirt.
My name is Mauricio Palas. Well, thanks for this wonderful conversation. Brent mentioned something that it's great. That is that things have been changing for the good lately, but things also there seems to be a threat kind of looming, and religion is mainly behind it for those rights and those things politically gained to get lost. So my question is, what would it be kind of the urgent things for people of faith to do for those to reigns gain not to be lost?
A really good question, Maurice, because I think that there's a wonderful book called God's Politics written by Jim Wallace, and it's mainly a United States book, that in it he talks about a religious attack requires a religious response. And that the only way to counteract bad religion, and by that he means fundamentalism of all of its types, is with good religion. And so there's certainly a huge backlash happening around the world. And many of the gains are at risk in many parts of the world. Countries where it used to be basically a don't ask, don't tell, the gay community existed, there were underground bars, but people who were not experiencing violence are experiencing violence today. And so there's no question, those of us who assumed that the movement towards equality was just like that it was always going to be on this path towards greater acceptance, are now discovering that's not necessarily true, that it's more like this, and we couldn't lose a lot of the gains that we have. And I think what's important is to support progressive faith communities in all of our different traditions. So I'll just use as an example from my friends in the Muslim community. The number of people who are speaking out and trying to create safe spaces all over the world, at great risk in some places, is amazing. And the witness of the Unity Mosque here in Toronto, powerful witness around the world. And so supporting those faith communities to do their work is crucially important. I think that helping to train young LGBT people of faith to be spokespeople in front of the media. One of the worst things that can happen, in my opinion, is that whenever the religious right is able to frame an argument, God versus gays, we lose. And you'll see some fundamentalist fanatic, clergy, debating a secular gay activist. God versus gays. We lose that argument. We have to have people of faith speaking up to counteract the arguments that are being used against us. And so I think training young people of faith to speak out, empowering progressive organizations to have a stronger voice around the world, to counteract the religious hatred, mobilizing more and more allies. I think there's lots that we can do to try to protect ourselves against the backlash that we're experiencing.
The gentleman over there. But the usher over here has been unemployed for the last half an hour, so okay, we've got the green shirt. All right, but we'll hear from the gentleman over there first.
Good evening, everyone, attendees and speakers. My name is Ahmed. I'm an Arab, and I came here to this event assuming it's a debate. Or it's a discussion, it's meant to be a conversation. I'm not the one who says yes or no, I just because when you said yes and it's not a debate, I'm assuming that good ideas and creative ideas comes when no's and yeses somehow merge with each other. So when you say yes and it's only a yes, that's not a conversation, that's a one-street directed conversation. I would like to have a two-way street conversation. Coming to my next question, which is, for me, I struggled a little bit with understanding why. I mean, I know it's a process. When I was younger, I wanted validations from everyone, from my father, from my mother, from religion, from society, and I have a question. Why does especially the LGBTQ community, especially not exclusive, but why is there always a constant need of validation, and the sense of that? Please like me, please approve me, please validate me, against the other, against legal structures entities, organizations, religion, whatever the other is, why is this something that has been associated for a while with the LGBTQ? I mean, if someone is confident, as the dear speaker said, I mean, if someone is confident, truly confident, why is there, like all these women's rights, trying to claim rights from men, you're actually approving that the man is higher than you and you're trying to take rights from him. So that's the point.
We got your point. Thank you. We got
So
your
why?
point.
Why is that?
I will answer your first question because the matter of LGBT rights is not up for discussion. It's in the law, and it's so we came in here to talk about specifically the issue of reconciling religion with sexual orientation. And it's directed at people who actually are, willing, they're well-meaning, but struggling and wanting to see how do I do this if I'm conflicted between the two, whether you're from within the LGBT community or outside it. So that's the conversation we're having here today. But the second part, I don't know if it's. Do you want to? Yeah, sure.
I may get the name of the book wrong. Velvet Rage is a book that's written about the experience of growing up LGBT in North America in the midst of a supposedly accepting society, but really a very sex-negative and LGBT-negative society. And a friend of mine preached a sermon one time when he said that the issue of trust in the LGBT community is a very difficult issue because most LGBT people grew up not trusting their own feelings at first, not trusting their family to share their information, not trusting their friends or their school, not trusting their faith communities, and not even necessarily trusting God. And so when we grow up with this real struggle with who can we trust, can we trust anyone, can we trust our own feelings, then trust is a big issue. And so no wonder we want to seek out places where we're validated, that we're okay, that we can learn to begin to trust ourselves again, and trust our friendships, and trust our relationships, and trust our partners, and not jump at everything that they do wrong and all of a sudden assume the relationship is falling apart. That we have to learn to trust. And having places where we're validated are extremely helpful and extremely healing, and hopefully at some point not necessary. That we don't have to have them, but it's so helpful to have them. And it's so helpful to have, faith communities that will stick up a rainbow flag and say, you're welcome here. It would be nice if they all were and we didn't have to have it. But we do need those places, and we do need places that will publicly state that they're affirming, and places where we know that we're safe.
Yeah, by the way, I'm not against. I'm not against this at all. By the way, I'm just saying because I struggled with this myself.
Yeah, no, and I wasn't.
I'm not out of this communities, but I was just making a point that trust can also come from other places, but it's also from within. I mean, if a person is coming yelling against me that you're going to go to hell and I can literally speak his same language of hatred, or I can just pray for him to leave at peace and leave me at peace and be more trusting with myself. So it begins also from within. So with this parallel with the organizations, I guess this is the ideal solution from my own opinion. That's why I asked the question.
Okay. Thank you. We have less than 10 minutes left, so let's try and make the... Okay, so we have one mic here, and okay, it looks like we're staying here for a couple of days. Okay, so green shirt, let's go. Love the hat. Mary.
Okay. So, my parents were straight, but split up when I was around 7 years old because my mom found out she was lesbian, and a lot of people I talk to say, oh, that must have been hard, and for me it really wasn't. I didn't realize there was a problem at all. It didn't even occur to me until I entered middle school, and I got asked questions about it and what's that like, and I discovered that I was pansexual, and it's hard to be bombarded with questions, even from people that aren't necessarily against, but just, I guess, aren't really educated or understand. And when I'm in grade 9 now, so when I went to high school this year, I go to an art school now, and I thought it would be different. It's not really. I'm still asked a lot of questions, and it's okay if people just want to learn, but sometimes I feel like I have to justify myself, and if I'm talking in between classes and the bell rings, and I feel like I haven't really got to make an argument. I don't want to say that word, but so I once heard that someone said, well, being LGBTQ is a slippery slope to bestiality, or being a pedophile. So I guess, how do I respond to that kind of stuff?
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, one thing that is a slippery slope is all the questions, and I remember when I was young and in high school and being out, and and one question will lead to another, and all this, and then it becomes quite personal, and private, and there's they're invading your. It feels like a bit of an invasion, a little bit, and I always had to struggle to balance, because I need the other people to understand, actually, and usually when people are asking questions, it's because they want to know. I think that, it took me a really long time to balance, I have a right to privacy, I have a right to who I am, and, I get to disclose. This is part of the reason why I, was fairly hesitant to do even this panel, and I'm I have a right to who I am in my internal life, but for me, I became involved in activist communities and that sort of thing, and for queer people, it's often been very, very important to educate everybody else, because it's we're a non-visible minority. The majority of us is not visible, so we have to do all this work to educate everybody. The one thing I would say is, it's not your job, and you have a right to just be no, And some days I'm like that, and sometimes I feel like every other human being, sometimes I feel generous of spirit, and I share, and I'm open, and sometimes I'm no. And it's just, you have to learn it, and you just get better with it the older you get, and, I used to share a little too much. Sometimes I don't share nearly enough as I should sometimes. I'm and there's Google. They can Google it. There's a million YouTubers to give information. There was no YouTube when I was in high school. There was there was Ahmed tube. He just asked me nonsense, and I'm anyway, yeah. So it's a balancing act, and it's unfortunately, as a queer person, I've had to do it my whole life. I continue to do it, and it's just something you gain a finesse, but you also gain this ability to be able to handle people and understand things and explain them, and be good-humored.
Yeah, I mean, a sexual minority, a religious minority, anyone who's not sort of part of the mainstream has to deal with some variation of that and explain.
And I'm black, I'm African, and I'm queer, so, and I get questions about all of them. I went to junior high in Brantford, Ontario, and people thought my life, some of those who chuckle know what I speak of. And there was a wall of National Geographics in the back of our grade 8 classroom, and everybody thought that was my life.
You had a lot of explaining to do, didn't you?
Right? So there is this, yes, minorities often have to explain and represent the whole group. But there's something, for me, the questions around queerness is because we're like,
it touches deeper, doesn't it?
it's not that it touches deeper, it's that we come from nowhere almost, right? Like, I'm Somali, that's a nation, that's a people, there's a language, I'm Muslim, there's a history, there's a culture, there's a religion, there's institutions. Like, I'm the only gay in my family, you know? Like, I just randomly appear, you know? So so there's this, like, queerness is like, it just pops up everywhere, you know? So it's only in the, like, you know, in the postmodern era, really, like, that it's congealed into a culture. There's an argument you can be made, there's long queer histories everywhere around the world, but what is the most readily available to people is, like, you know, like queer liberation movements and stuff like that, and the information in the modern era. And so we're just like this non-visible minority that has to, like, actually, like, name it and to take up space, you know? And there is something different about that, where there is no gay nation. There's homo-nationalism, though, which is a little different.
So can I actually give you a little perspective from somebody who's, so obviously I'm an ally, but, you know, being straight, and I needed, and so look, when you think about my story, I needed somebody to help me. I needed to ask questions to learn, right? And I think, like Ahmed said, you know, it's a finesse. You know, you do it when you want to. If you don't feel like answering questions, don't ask questions. But also maybe perceive the questions differently. It's people are interested in you. People want to learn about you. Maybe take it more positively as well, and maybe that will put a spin on it, because that's why I ask questions.
Yeah.
I can't say everybody does, but that's why I do.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so this is the last question. I appreciate you guys staying in your seats for this long, and you've been a wonderful audience. We'll take the last one, or is it a comment, whichever.
Okay, thanks very much. My name's Danielle. I'm here with my wife and our good friend who performed our marriage ceremony. So it's really amazing to be in this room with people who are doing so much to, I guess, fight for us and root for our cause. So thank you very much for everything that you're doing. My question is about children. We're at the point where we want to have a family, and there are people in our immediate family, our extended family, who don't approve of that choice or how we're choosing to do that. And as adults, we can sort of reconcile, you know, okay, you don't agree with our choice or what we want to do, and as an adult, I can, you know, wrap my head around it. It's sad and difficult, but I can, you know, say, okay, my dad doesn't agree with what I want to do. You know, how do we start to broach some of those conversations with children when, you know, how do you explain to them, like, oh, your grandfather doesn't think you should exist, or your family structure is not right? You know, how do you start that with young kids or children as they grow older?
Two things I would say. First of all, when kids are raised in loving families, they can handle almost anything. Mm-hmm. When they know there's love at home, and simply because you've raised this question, my guess is your kids are probably going to be the luckiest kids in the world to be able to be raised by the two of you and to have that love. And so when they experience the challenges out there, they're going to be so equipped to be able to handle that and to come home and have great conversations because they know that they're going to be loved. The second thing is, watch those kids change the hearts of the people who are opposed. I don't know how many parents and grandparents have all of a sudden fallen in love with the kids and have been totally transformed by their experience. So just because they're opposed right now does not predict that they're going to be opposed when those kids come along. And so, you know, I think it's a blessing that you have to be able to bring kids into this world and to be able to do so without any hesitation, because you know they're going to be grounded in love and they will have an amazing, amazing experience when they come home all the time. So,
anything else?
I have, so I'm not married and have kids yet, but several of my friends, so I'm in my 30s, I'm not going to tell you exactly where in my 30s, but a bunch of my queer friends have gotten married and have kids now, And it's really interesting whether they're Muslim or Christian or whatever. I have a godson and he has two moms. One is Italian descent and one is Irish descent. And both their families were they're both Catholic and had quite a difficult time with it. Really, as they were trying to conceive, like basically everything broke down. And it really was like coming out 2.0. Like it was like a second coming out. Because when you come out, there's a generation of us who came out when we were young. And I've been out over 20 years. But especially those of us who come from religious communities, when you start saying, well, I'm getting married, I'm going to have children, then it takes it to like another level for our families. And I think the Reverend's are absolutely right in this, I don't counsel families, so I don't see this often, but with my godson, the family did not handle it well, the marriage. They did not handle the whole process of them getting pregnant. And now the grandparents beg to spend time with their grandchild all the time. And it's beautiful and it's lovely. And, and like we did when we first came out, there's some bridges that needed some mending about their reactions to all of this. And I think all of my friends have done what they've always done, which is be good queers and really have room in their heart for everyone. And we all grow together through all these challenges,
Any experience with this, Tasnim?
Yeah, I mean, I echo everybody's sentiment. I mean, the exact same experience, where, the grandparents are not accepting, and then all of a sudden the kids are born, and you give it even like 6 months, and the grandparents can't stay away, and family can't stay away. It's just, I've seen it, like, every single situation. So kids are the glue and bring us together, right? So don't be afraid. Just show them a lot of love.
Okay, give it up to our panel, folks. Thank you all for showing up. And remember, April 24, if you don't come back here, I'm going to be very upset with you. See you next time.